Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Hello and welcome. 2 American soldiers were killed and 2 others were injured in 2 separate attacks west of Baghdad. A U.S. military spokesman said that the attacks took place near the area of Balad, 100 kilometers north of Baghdad. British forces centered in Basra, in southern Iraq, fear attacks similar to those which recently took place in Nasiriyah. British forces ordered its troops to raise their guard, elevating the threat to the highest level, after receiving information about possible attacks in the city. Additional security measures are being taken near the British forces' main headquarters, including the searching of cars. In a statement, Iranian President Mohammad Khatami openly recognized the Iraqi Interim Governing Council, saying that the council is capable of working with the Iraqi people to resolve Iraqi issues and taking measures that will lead to independence. Syrian Vice President Abdul Rahim Kadam denied that his country has intentions to intervene in Iraqi affairs. Meanwhile, Kadam considers that the creation of a Kurdish state in northern Iraq is impossible. He considers the new Israeli threats against Syria as part of the Israeli psychological warfare against his country. Tomorrow, the presidents of Syria and Lebanon are expected to discuss their relationship between the 2 countries in light of the current developments. During their meeting, the 2 leaders will review the Syrian Accountability Act, which was passed by the United States Senate, in addition to increasing Israeli threats against Damascus. The latest threat coming from the Chief of Staff of the Israeli Army, Moshe Ya'alon, who said that Syria is responsible for being the headquarters of Palestinian Organizations in Damascus and allowing Hezbollah to attack Israel, indicating that Lebanon also suffers from lack of calm or stability. He stressed that there is no separation between Syria, Lebanon, or Hezbollah. The Egyptian Chief of Intelligence, Omar Suleiman, expressed optimism about the prospects of reaching a ceasefire between the Palestinians and Israelis. This came after having met with the Palestinian leadership, President Yasser Arafat and Prime Minister Ahmed Kareh. Suleiman said that the Israeli and Palestinian sides are open to discussion. Suleiman also met with the director of Israel's Mossad, Meir Dagan, in West Jerusalem, and he will continue discussions with Israeli and Palestinian officials. A few days after Prime Minister Ahmed Kareh's government began its work officially, the Egyptian delegation returned to the region in an attempt to revive the spirit of the peace process in accordance with the United States vision. In a meeting with Palestinian President Yasser Arafat and Prime Minister Ahmed Kareh in Ramallah, Omar Suleiman, the Egyptian Chief of Intelligence, expressed his optimism about the possibility of reaching a new ceasefire.
Inshallah, God willing, there will be a truce and there will be a dialogue. We are thankful to the Honorable President of Egypt, Hosni Mubarak, for his attention and the defense of the peace process against its enemies. These long-lasting supportive efforts offered to the Palestinian people and the Palestinian National Authority are welcomed with happiness.
Suleiman's meeting with Palestinian officials preceded a meeting in Jerusalem with the head of the Mossad, Meir Dagan, and other security officials. He returns to Israel again to complete his talks after convening his discussions with the Palestinian side. Tel Aviv is prepared for a new ceasefire on the condition that Kareh's government carries out its security obligations.
There is coordination, especially on the idea of taking action on the issue of a ceasefire. There are discussions among the Palestinians of the possibility of agreeing to the steps to be made with Israeli and American sides.
Abu Ala held a session with his government in Ramallah after meeting with Suleiman. They debated the Egyptian idea of a ceasefire to be preceded by negotiations with Palestinian opposition factions, which surprisingly have indicated the possibility of accepting a truce. Although most people are optimistic about the possibility of reaching a new ceasefire with Israel, they are cautious about Israeli political maneuvering. This is especially so when one also considers past experiences which prove that Israel is not serious about resolving the crisis here, at least as long as Israel continues the construction of the separating wall. Majid Saeed, Abu Dhabi Television, at the Palestinian headquarters in Ramallah. According to a Turkish official from the health administration in the city, the number of people killed by the explosions in the two synagogues in Istanbul has risen to 20. Dozens of people were injured as a result of the explosions, or as a result of the ammonium gas that was used in the explosion. The international community and the Arab League condemned the bombing. According to official Turkish sources, the two bombings that targeted two synagogues in Istanbul killed 20 people and injured more than 250 others. There were contradictory official reports about the number of casualties. The health minister of Turkey announced that 17 people were killed and 215 were injured, but Turkey's interior minister stated that 26 people were killed and 246 were injured. Officials said that the explosion operations were carried out by two car bombs near the synagogues. Eyewitnesses near the explosions said that most of those killed were Jewish. One of the explosions detonated in front of Neve Shalom synagogue in the Begalo neighborhood. The second explosion hit another synagogue in Sesli neighborhood. Previously, Neve Shalom synagogue, which was opened in 1951, was targeted in an attack by Palestinians in 1968, killing 22 people. This synagogue is considered the most important one in Turkey. The Turkish Prime Minister, Recep Erdogan, condemned the two explosions, saying that they threaten stability and peace in Turkey, indicating that all possible measures will be taken to punish the criminals.
I think the objective of this explosion is to threaten peace and stability in Turkey. I condemn whoever is responsible for this attack, which is a criminal and terrorist attack on humanity. We'll take all necessary measures to stop this from happening again.
Meanwhile, the Turkish Foreign Minister Abdullah Gülay said that two explosions were terrorist attacks carried out by international terrorist organizations. Israel condemned the Istanbul explosions, describing them as terrorist and criminal acts. A spokesman from the Israeli Foreign Ministry said that Israel already established an emergency unit in its foreign ministry in Istanbul, offering help to the Turkish authorities and Jewish community living there. In the wake of the explosions, the Israeli Foreign Minister, Silvan Shalom, called on the international community to fight what he called forces of evil. The group or organization that carried out these attacks are still unknown. However, an unknown man called the Anadolu News Agency, saying that the Turkish Great Eastern Islamic Raiders Front is responsible for the explosions that took place in Istanbul. The United States and Israel have concluded what is described as the biggest military deal between the two countries. Washington will provide Israel with 102 F-16 fighter jets, all of which are equipped with a modern anti-missile defense system and a digital guidance system. The Israeli Yediot Ahronot newspaper reported that delegates from the two sides signed the $7 billion deal in Texas in the presence of the Israeli defense minister. According to the newspaper, the plans are equipped with satellite-guided missiles in addition to spying and signal scrambling technology. Furthermore, the planes are supplied with a unique fuel tank which enables the aircrafts to fly for long distances. An announcement made by somebody claiming to be from Al-Qaeda alleged that the organization is not responsible for the attack that took place in Saudi Arabia last week, and warned that a new attack will take place in a big American city within the next 2 years. The announcement, which was published on their website, claimed that Al-Qaeda is behind all the attacks targeting the U.S. forces in Iraq. The announcement was written in a similar language used in previous Al-Qaeda announcements, but has not been investigated yet.
The National Council denounces Israeli arresting of its consultant Dr. Naif Jarad in Tulkarem, considering this oppressive measure as an aggression on the National Council and its role, calling on the human rights and parliamentary institutions to condemn the arrest. The Council also called for releasing Mr. Jarad immediately, as well as all the Palestinian detainees who succumbed to the Israeli oppressive measures. A number of citizens were wounded during Israeli occupation troops incursion into Tulkarem refugee camp amid heavy fire shooting towards the citizens and their houses. Ambulances were hardly able to save the injured citizens due to Israeli roadblocks, while the occupation troops reclosed the Kafriyat roadblock south of Tulkarem city, north of the West Bank. Meanwhile, Israeli occupation troops raided Sunday Jenin city and arrested Rushdi Nader Hamad, 14 years old. In the meantime, a number of military jeeps backed by an armored tank rolled into the city of Jenin from many directions, particularly in the northern street of Al-Nasr, while they boosted up their presence in the surroundings of Jenin city. On the other hand, Israeli occupation troops continued imposing a tight siege and curfew for the 7th day running on Asir al-Shamaliya town in Nablus in the West Bank. Head of the village's council, Asad Sawalme, said that the occupation troops boosted up their presence and closed all shops in addition to barring students from reaching schools. Families of prisoners and detainees held Monday the weekly sit-in strike in front of the International Committee of the Red Cross in Gaza City in solidarity with their sons who are suffering the worst physical and psychological torture inside Israeli jails. The families called on the world community to move promptly to stop Israeli aggression against their sons and working for releasing them. The families sent their greetings to their sons on the occasion of Al-Fitr Eid, voicing hope to receive the next year's feast while they were released, achieving their hopes to freedom. A press conference on the annual review of the cooperation program between the UNICEF and the Palestinian Authority institutions was held Monday at the Ministry of Higher Education's premises in Ramallah city. The conference was attended by UNICEF representative in Palestine, David Basuni, and the Secretary of the Ministry of the Higher Education in Gaza Strip, Dr. Abdullah Abdul-Min'am, and Under Secretary of Ministry of Planning in Ramallah, Samih Abed. The meeting tackled the basic outcomes of the UNICEF program for 2003, as well as the role of the UNICEF in supporting the Palestinian people. On the other hand, Dr. Abdul-Min'am held the increase in the UNICEF budget for the coming year for covering the Palestinians' needs in the fields of education, health, and social development. A report by the Agricultural Relief Society on the negative repercussions of the building of the separation wall surrounding Jerusalem city asserted that such wall will isolate at least 50,000 citizens and thousands of Bedouins outside the separation wall south of Jerusalem. The report also pointed out that many residential neighborhoods were isolated outside the wall, while non-residential wide areas estimated at tens of dunams were annexed to the separation wall.
Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon flew into Rome early Monday for a 3-day visit to Italy aimed to enlist Italy's help in fending off European Union criticism of Israeli policy towards Palestinians and help stem what he calls a rise in anti-Semitism in Europe. Sharon will urge his Italian counterpart Silvio Berlusconi, whose country holds the rotating EU presidency, to water down a pending EU condemnation of Israel's West Bank wall and Israel's snubbing of EU Middle East envoy Mark Ott. And Israel was recently angered by an EU poll that found a majority of its citizens saw Israel as the greatest threat to world peace. But Sharon has a warm relationship with fellow right-winger Berlusconi, under whom Italy has become a solid ally of Israel despite strong EU criticism of Israeli military action to quell a 3-year-old Palestinian uprising. U.S. occupation forces launched Monday a major air and ground operation dubbed Ivy Cyclone 2, bombarding some northern Iraqi territories and carrying out raids detaining many civilians, including women. The new operation comes as an audio tape aired on Sunday, said to be from Saddam Hussein, called for more anti-occupation attacks, while Washington insisted its troops will not leave Iraq after the expected return of power to Iraqis next June.
The U.S. occupation launches an operation after the other in an apparently vain attempt to stop anti-U.S. attacks. After Operation Iron Hammer, another one was launched on Sunday dubbed Ivy Cyclone 2, aimed at pressing air and ground operations against fighters in the rest of North. U.S. forces fired mortars, tank rounds and helicopter guns early on Monday in a massive demonstration of firepower around Saddam Hussein's hometown Tikrit. The coordinated nighttime operations targeted areas from which occupation forces claim they have been attacked in recent days.
We had today some mortar launches, a rocket launch. We've also seen an improvised explosive device, a bomb that blew up in Tikrit. We've had no casualties from these attacks, but what we're doing tonight is we are firing at a mortar point. We are targeting an area where we've had the rocket launch out of earlier today.
U.S. forces claim they had captured Qadim Mohammed Faris, a Fidaiyin leader blamed for many anti-U.S. attacks. They added that Faris was closely linked to Khamis Sarhan, who is number 54 on the U.S. Army wanted list of 55 former top Iraqi officials. Our correspondent in the flashpoint town of Fallujah reported that American forces also bombed posts outside the town suspected to house some fighters. A military spokesman announced that U.S. forces fired a satellite-guided missile for the first time since the official end of major combat. He claimed that the missile hit a fighters training center on an island west of the northern city of Kirkuk. In another process of showing their power to Iraqis, U.S. occupation forces flooded a Baghdad neighborhood, terrorizing women and children, getting them out of their houses in the middle of cold weather conditions. Troops detained many Iraqi civilians, and they daringly handcuffed an old woman in front of her family members and then detained her. The U.S. military also detained 20 other Iraqis. While raids and shelling went on, the London-based Al Majalla said that it received a message from Al-Qaeda organization claiming responsibility for the bombings of the Italian police unit headquarters in Nasiriyah. The received email was signed by Abu Muhammad al-Ablaj, who claimed to be an Al-Qaeda official. Saddam Hussein also resurfaced and he launched new audio recording calling Iraqis to wage what he called holy war against occupation forces, warning of more deaths for US-led troops. The tape aired Sunday by an Arab satellite channel said that occupation forces would only find disappointment and loss of life in Iraq. He also criticized Iraqis cooperating with coalition forces, calling them stray dogs that walk alongside the caravan. US President George W. Bush reacted to the tape.
I haven't seen the specifics. I suspect it's the same old stuff. You know, it's propaganda. And, you know, we're not leaving until the job is done. Pure and simple. A free and peaceful Iraq, it will be a historic event. And I'm sure he would like to see us leave, if in fact it's his voice.
Bush also spoke about the announcement of plans to bring forward the political transfer of power to Iraqis next June. But it looks like an American withdrawal from occupied Iraq seems to be out of sight, as Bush reiterated Paul Bremer's words that troops will remain in Iraq and that their number would depend on the security situation.
Japan said it would not be intimidated by whom it called terrorists after an alleged Al-Qaeda source warned Japan not to send troops to Iraq and claimed the bombings against Italian forces in Iraq last week. The news unsettled financial markets in Tokyo, with dealers regarding it as a major factor sending down both the yen and Japanese share prices.
In response to one of the most specific threats today to be made by the Al-Qaeda network on Japanese interests, Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihiro Koizumi said Monday, Japan must not give in to so-called terrorists who are, quote, making threats everywhere in the world. Japanese Foreign Ministry said Japan was investigating the credibility of the threat after the London-based Arab-language newspaper Al-Quds Al-Arabi said that Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda network was planning car bombings against the United States and its allies, including Japan. The weekly said it had received the message from an Al-Qaeda operative who said the group would strike in Japan if Tokyo sent troops to Iraq. However, Japan's chief government spokesman played down Al-Qaeda's threats.
We've been getting similar sort of threats regularly since September 11, and each time we verified its contents and increased security where necessary. However, there has never been a serious threat so far.
Japan has so far indicated it may not send troops to occupied Iraq by the end of this year, but nevertheless sent a fact-finding mission over the weekend to assess the situation on the ground. Despite the government's playing down of the threat, Tokyo markets were spooked. Japan's Nikkei average fell over 3% and was below 10,000 for the first time since August. Economists said should the reported threat be supported by evidence, the yen's fall would become much faster. Once again, the government sought to minimize the impact of the threat on Japan's economy.
The markets fell indeed. Well, there is no clearly defined reason why they fell. However, we believe it may be because markets got cold feet after a sudden rise in the yen and fall in the dollar, or because of people profit-taking on the previous rise in the market, or possibly out of desperation from the fact that U.S. markets are having a hard time breaking through despite good economic numbers out of there.
Meanwhile, Nippon Television Network said based on a telephone poll released Monday, almost 3/4 of Japanese are against sending troops to Iraq. The ratio of opponents to the proposed dispatch of Japan's self-defense forces to Iraq in the nationwide poll jumped by 22 percentage points to 71% compared with the survey conducted last August.
U.S. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld began a two-day visit to South Korea on Monday, his first since taking office nearly 3 years ago, with lingering questions about a plan to consolidate his country's bases and end its military presence in the South Korean capital of Seoul. This report has more.
U.S. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld met with South Korean President Roh Moo-hyun at the Blue House on Monday and discussed various bilateral matters following a security consultative meeting at the Defense Ministry. Visiting correspondent Paul Report said Secretary Rumsfeld had told President Roh that today's defense talks had been the most substantive meeting the allies had ever had. He discussed bilateral security and Pentagon plans to realign the U.S. military global footprint so to assure the South Koreans that they would not be left vulnerable to the North's large army.
This alliance has been successful for 50 years. It is an enormously successful record. And it's been successful because we have had the ability to deter and defend and, if necessary, prevail. And that has been well understood. I can assure you it will be well understood in the years ahead. And needless to say, neither of our governments would do anything that would in any way weaken the deterrent and the capability to defend.
He also urged North Korea to verifiably and irreversibly dismantle its nuclear weapons programs. Throughout his trip, Rumsfeld has insisted that there were no plans for a possible withdrawal of some of the U.S. troops in South Korea. But official sources said that Washington is proposing pulling back some 15,000 troops of the 2nd Infantry Division from the front line with North Korea to bases south of Seoul. The relocation is part of a sweeping reorganization of U.S. troops across the region, including the 47,000 troops based in Japan. Analysts say the consolidation of U.S. forces could lead to reductions in overall troops number in South Korea.
한미 간에는
We are moving forward with plans to bring about Yongsan relocation and the redeployment of 2nd Infantry Division. However, during today's meeting, we did not have any discussions regarding any possible reduction of U.S. forces, and I believe that we have not yet reached that stage to bring about that discussion.
The Seoul government estimates it will cost some $3 billion to relocate from Yongsan, and Washington wants the South Koreans to begin acquiring land for the relocation. Rumsfeld also expressed appreciation for South Korean president's decision to send additional troops to Iraq, as well as $260 million in reconstruction funds by 2007. However, South Korea said last week that it would limit its additional troops deployment in Iraq to 3,000 soldiers, rebuffing Washington's request for a bigger contingent amid security scare. About 40 South Korean protesters marched from the defense ministry to the war memorial to denounce Rumsfeld's visit. The demonstrators say Rumsfeld is trying to pressure Seoul into sending more troops to Iraq. They're also demanding the withdrawal of the 37,000 American troops in South Korea.
Britain, the primary ally of the United States, is carrying out an unprecedented level of security measures to receive the American President George Bush, while fathers of British soldiers who died in Iraq and anti-war activists are planning to receive him with a lot of criticism rather than a warm welcome.
As
the coalition forces are going through a crisis in Iraq, the British capital of London is preparing to receive President Bush. Priority is given to providing security for the American president and the people accompanying him, using 5,000 police officers in addition to undercover officers.
Our priority is to ensure safety.
Our priorities are to ensure the safety of the president. However, we'll also make sure that the demonstrators will have an opportunity to give their views and voices.
Give their views and voice them.
Iraq will be one of the important issues that Bush and Prime Minister Tony Blair will discuss. Many parents of British soldiers who died in Iraq have their own view on this controversial issue. This explains why Bush will only meet with a select few of them, excluding the father of Thomas Keys, for example.
I just would like to meet the man. Where is my invite? Of course, they will pick a select few from the parents of soldiers that lost their lives in Iraq. I'm not happy to receive him, and I'm not ready to shake his hand that is stained with the blood of my son, Thomas.
Apparently he got up and he said, right.
The anti-war activists are preparing themselves in order to make their voices heard by President Bush, which may spoil the joy of the visit.
We will not be able to get very close to him, but we will try to make him see anti-war demonstrations everywhere he goes. His visit will not be limited to drinking tea with the Queen or conversing with Tony Blair.
Really more importantly for us,
President Bush will travel to London on Tuesday, where Baghdad and other Iraqi districts, as well as the images of American soldiers coming back in coffins, will be in his memory. The General Secretary of the Arab League, Amr Moussa, said that ignoring Israeli policies and violations will threaten international stability. Concerning the explosions in the 2 Jewish synagogues in Turkey, Moussa said that the Arab League is opposed to using violence against civilians. However, the increased use of violence by Israel is no longer acceptable. If Israel is not stopped, there could be dangerous consequences as people continue to sympathize with the suffering of the Palestinian people.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities. and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.